You have a good theory on why people fall into conspiracy theories.
You often get these fake models that oversimplify things and make everything easy to connect. That's what a conspiracy theory is, right? Suddenly, instead of the complexity of the world, you just have one thing that will explain everything really powerfully.
You had a student, she put this question on her phone after your lecture, and it said, "Is this the game you really want to be playing?"
She said that it had pulled her out of 5 years of depression. I had a friend who was starting to get into rock climbing, and then he stopped because when he climbed, his step count went down.
Welcome to 2%. I'm your host, Michael Easter. Today, we are talking to a man who has lived rent-free in my head for the past 5 years. His thinking has improved my life more than anyone else. The guide made me throw out my fitness tracker and stop caring about what it told me. He also made me realize that meeting a certain salary ultimately was not going to make me that much happier. He also reframed my relationship to news and social media and helped me use it in a way that improved my life rather than made me more neurotic. He even helped me understand why it was that my students who got B's, B pluses, A minuses did so much better in the long run than my students who got A's. And finally, he helped me understand why it is that the NBA when I was a kid is so much better than the NBA today. Now, if you have read my book, Scarcity Brain, you're going to be familiar with today's guest. We're talking to Thi Nguyen. He's a philosopher at the University of Utah, and he has got a new book that I highly, highly recommend everyone read. It's called The Score: How to Stop Playing Somebody Else's Game. In fact, in my book, Scarcity Brain, I traveled all the way up to Salt Lake City, Utah to sit down with him, and I devoted an entire chapter of that book to his work. That's how important I think it is. So we got a sweeping episode coming at you, but it has a ton of utility. It'll help you understand what it means to live a good life and ways in your life that you are being steered in directions you may not want to go in and what to do about it. So let's get into the episode. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, man. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Last time we met, you introduced me to the greatest, I believe it was a raisin croissant I've ever had in my life, and I constantly still think about it. And speaking of rich, fatty foods, here's actually where I want to start. I want to start with weight loss because I think that everyone at some point in their life has tried to lose a pound or two. So you used weight loss and your own weight loss journey in the book to get into this larger argument you make. So walk us through weight loss and what happened to you.
The weight loss story is kind of like entangled with this whole like physical story, right? Like I grew up as a video gamer and reading nerd, hated my body, uninterested in movement. And I kind of just like, I think I just drank relentless amounts of juice all the time. Yeah. And at some point, like I had gotten big enough that like my knees hurt and it like exhausted me to walk from my car to my department, which I didn't like. And so I started trying to lose weight. And the first few things I did were really simple and straightforward. I cut out a few things. I basically stopped drinking orange juice, and my body, I drank too much orange juice. Like my stomach just felt better. I'd made a few tweaks, and I think a lot of people will recognize these tweaks. So this is like back before the current awareness of like whatever protein primal diets. This was like 20 something years ago.
Yeah.
And I just shifted away from like noodles with cheese every single meal and started making like stews with meat and like with like rich rib tuber stew, and I just started feeling good. Yeah. I lost a little bit more weight. I started exercising more, and then my weight loss stopped, and I really got focused on that, and I started being like, okay, I got to track stuff. So I got a tracker. I started entering a lot of information in, and each time my weight would drop a little more, and it would stall, and I would have to do something more dramatic. And so at some point I had a weight tracker, and this is in the early days of these things. So I was entering all of my nutritional information into it, which was exhausting. And then I started realizing, so if you have a really old school primitive weight tracker, like I had, a nutritional tracker, it's really hard if you cook your own stew to get information, if you want exactly the right information. So you have to like kind of painstakingly enter each ingredient, and it gets really exhausting.
It's a lot of math.
It's a lot of math. But if you buy prepackaged food, then all the nutritional information is right there. And so I think this is the part where it gets really perverse. So in order to continue my nutrition optimization journey, I stopped cooking. I had been cooking stews using like grass-fed meat and like tubers and vegetables from the farmer's market. And then I switched over to like prepackaged Annie's Mac and crap like that again, just because it was easier to enter. And this is the point, like I was there for just a few months and I was miserable. I was miserable because I was doing all this entry work. And also I think whatever was going on with me, having rich vegetable-y stews was making me feel amazing. And eating this other prepackaged stuff was making me feel bad. And I like kind of got myself for a few months at least to ignore both the kind of larger life sorrow and the kind of bad, empty, hollow feeling in my body as I kept wanting to track nutritional information, kept pushing my weight down. And then eventually I was like, this is crap. And I stopped.
And I think to quickly like kind of pull back and explain to listeners what happened. It's like, you realize you need to lose weight. You find this thing, these stews that help that, the number goes down. You feel amazing. Like, this is what we want out of health. I want to feel more energetic. I don't want to get winded as I walk to my car. This is a good thing. Then the number stops going down. So you go, well, the number stopped going down. So what can I do? And this leads you into like, well, if I just count my calories, but now the stew becomes this huge pain in the ass to actually do that. So you go, well, it would be easier to just do these other foods that aren't as healthy. And by focusing on that number, all of a sudden you start eating and doing these things that don't actually reinforce this larger goal of health that you're after.
So there are two things that are going on here. One is that the demand for data entry and the demand to track nutrition, like kind of pushed me in a particular course. And I think that's one level. And there's another level, which is that I was using the idea of weight loss itself as a proxy for health.
Yeah.
I remember I was talking to this once in a classroom about this problem of like how excess quantification kind of sucks our attention over to things that are easily counted. And one of my students was like, yeah, but what if what you're trying to do is already easily quantifiable? Like, I'm trying to get healthier, and like weight loss, that's just a number. That's just quantifiable. And I was like, at what point did the entirety of being healthy come down to weight loss? Like, where did we get that transition? And I think like, he kind of reacted, and I saw my whole class like just kind of jump at the same time. And I think it's like, in some sense, it should be easy. The thought that having lower weight is not the same as being healthy, that should be a simple, you don't need like a professor in a philosophy class to say that. And yet it's so easy to get sucked in that even though you can say that to yourself, you forget and you become obsessed because there's this easily trackable proxy.
Yeah. So this idea of value capture. How do you explain that to people tightly who are not familiar?
So this is the name I needed to come up with. For this stuff. So I came up with the name value capture. And value capture is any case where your values are rich and subtle or progressing in that direction. And then you get parked in some environment, either an institution or a bureaucracy or just with an app or tracker. And it gives you some simplified version of your values, typically a quantified metric. And then the quantification takes over. It becomes your focus. So like getting on Twitter to communicate with people and then getting obsessed with your likes and follows. Or I think like one of the first examples I started noticing was people getting really obsessed with their Fitbit. And I think you have to be clear that obsession is different from just finding it useful, right? Like, I think a lot of people start with this thing. They're like, oh, I don't move enough. This helps me move a little bit. And then at some point, I had a friend who was starting to get into rock climbing and loved it. I'm a climber. I love climbing passionately. And then he stopped because when he climbed, his step count went down. I think it crystallizes for me what's going on, because part of what's important is there are all these goods to rock climbing. I mean, obviously the person loved it and made them happier. There's all this multidimensionality of joint movement. There's all this learning of precision and skill. But that isn't easily trackable by a mechanical pre-made device.
Right.
And so if you let yourself get oriented towards the pervasive, ready quantifications, your attention gets dragged away from the kinds of things that are rich and complicated and interesting, but don't track easily with a mechanical device, and towards the kind of things that are easily trackable at scale. Yeah. And this is the dynamic that I got the most interested. Yeah. What happens, the problem of value capture for me, so I started calling it value outsourcing. Like what you're doing is, instead of picking what you find valuable, instead of coming up with your version of what's important to you about your health or your fitness, you outsource it, and you outsource it to a distant institution. And a lot of the times, like a lot of outsourcing, what ends up being at the center of the outsourcing, it's not always just some like evil villain being like, I'm going to force you to like what I want. It's what you're outsourcing yourself to is a bureaucratic process that aims you at the kinds of things that bureaucracies are good at aiming at, which is easily very visible, very legible countables.
Yeah, makes it easier. All right, what I want to do so people really kind of understand this is I want to just like rapid fire through a bunch of examples. Okay. Are you ready for this?
I have an espresso. I am so ready.
All right, take a sip, and we will start with grades.
Grades, I think, are one of the clearest examples to me of one of the central dynamics in value capture. So I teach, I see this all the time. I see students who don't know how to feel out what's interesting to them and only know how to respond in the direction of grades. And I was trying to understand what was going on, why students were so grade obsessed. And I found this text that helped me understand so much of what was going on. It's Theodore Porter's Trust in Numbers. Okay. So Theodore Porter is a historian. He studies quantification culture. And he was really interested in the question of why politicians and bureaucrats often reach compulsively for metrics and quantification to justify what they're doing, even when they're clearly bad. And what he ends up saying that it's not that quantification and he says there are two ways of knowing about the world, qualitative and quantitative. Mm-hmm. And it's not that one is better. It's that they're tools for different tasks. Mm-hmm. And the problem is compulsively reaching for one tool, even when it's inappropriate. Yeah. So he says that qualitative information, justifying things in terms of words, is good at being sensitive, subtle, open-ended, dynamic, at responding to all kinds of new information, but being multidimensional. Yeah. But it travels badly between contexts because it requires a lot of shared background knowledge to understand.
Right. It takes more time and thought.
It takes more time and thought, and it takes a lot of times expertise. I think this is the crucial thing. Yeah. So when I write to my students about what's going on in their essays, I write paragraphs about their rigor, their originality. I use a lot of philosophical terminology. I talk about their ability to do various kinds of critical reasoning. That stuff won't be comprehensible to, say, a dean of the business school. And it won't aggregate. And it won't aggregate precisely because, in some sense, the important thing is that when I'm writing to my students and when each different professor is writing to their students, they can respond differently to students' different abilities and interests. I might write, if one of my students really cares about writing quality and wants to be a writer, I can focus on that a lot, but I won't do that for other students. Yeah. So it doesn't travel well. That's the way he puts it. It requires a lot of shared background knowledge. So to get around this, we have this tool we've made up in institutional context that is institutional quantifications. And what we do there is we identify some context invariant kernel, some chunk that everyone understands and everyone counts in the same way. Yeah. And we hold it fixed and we all collect into that same bucket. So this is like GPA, right? Yeah. We all agree about approximately what an A, B, and C means. We all agree about the numerical equivalents. And this means that when I give my student an A or a B, that information is instantly transferable to someone in a totally different context. And because we all agree, it can aggregate instantly, and this enables GPAs, right? Yeah. So one way to put it is that the reason that grades, letter grades, are so important socially is that we've engineered them to be comprehensible to everybody, and we've engineered them to be comprehensible by removing nuance and context. So it's not an accident. I think this is the thing. This is the point, I think, where Porter, like, this explanation, like, ripped my mind apart. And, like, I felt like I Matrix style saw the bones of the universe I was in. Amazing. Which is that, you know, metrics are powerful and they're kind of inhumane and simplified. And that's no accident. Yeah. They're powerful because they've been engineered to be informationally portable. And the thing that makes them portable is this context stripping, nuance stripping, sensitivity stripping.
Yeah. So when I was a professor, what was the big thing I wanted my students to leave that course with? It was new ways of, I was in the journalism department. It was improving their writing. It was ways of thinking about research, about talking to people, about sourcing. It was all these things that were, in theory, going to help them if they went into the world of journalism and the world in general. So this is like the big messy goal of the course, right? It's very hard to like measure that. But what did my students really care about? It was the grade, right? And those two things, what was interesting, didn't always align. So I found that my best students were often B+, A-, because I might give them an assignment and they would come at it in a really weird, creative way, but they were taking a swing. And so I'd have to say, all right, well, I really appreciate what you did here. Here are all these edits, like, great work, but like B+, A-. Meanwhile, the students who would consistently get the A's were a little bit more robotic. It was like, we're not taking the swing. We're doing things exactly as prescribed because I need that A. But it's those kids that would take the swings, that were creative, that would think about things differently. Those were the kids that would eventually go on and get those big jobs in newsrooms.
Yeah, I think an even clearer example for me is learning outcomes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that got me into this was, in my first job, I was the learning outcomes liaison. And what learning outcomes are quantified measures of how you have successfully taught your students. But importantly, they're used for institutional transparency. So what this means is, like, the Utah State Legislature doesn't know which departments are full of BS or not, and everyone is worried that philosophy is full of BS. Okay. And so they want some kind of outcome that they can check on. So if I say, like, look, I'm going to teach my students to be more reflective and more thoughtful, and they're like, and I'm like, I succeeded. And they're like, how? Prove that to us. It's hard for me to do so because it requires an exercise of judgment.
Right.
So what learning outcomes tend to focus on is the kind of things that we can assess mechanically. So they tend to focus, these days, they focus on graduation rate, graduation speed, student evaluation scores, salary after graduation. So, but I just want here, let me point this out. I think this is a great case. So if I have a student who's in my class and they were dead set on a career in, like, some kind of business, optimize for money, destroy the world, do whatever. And I teach them a bunch of material that shakes them up and makes them realize, oh my God, relentlessly optimizing for money destroys the environment and also screws over other people. And they also start to realize they've been unhappy all the time and they want to do something else. So they take an extra year to figure out what they actually want to do, and they look for an ethical job. I have failed by learning outcomes.
Yeah.
The learning outcomes we have, because they took an extra year and they took a lower paying job because they were concerned about which jobs were ethical or not. But again, you can easily see part of what's going on here because there's not an easy way for that institution to track whether or not students are more ethical, right? There's not a mechanical ethical assessment score, but there is a mechanical graduation rate score. Yeah. So there's a certain directionality to what bureaucracies can target. And part of the problem with value capture is that you internalize into your own soul that kind of bureaucratic thinness.
Yeah. And I think salaries are another great example. It's like people get so focused on their salary and making that number rise. But then the question is, well, why do you want more money? It's, well, maybe it'll make me happier. I want more freedom. I want more time. I want less stress in my life. And to a certain extent, like, a salary will do that if you're, below a certain income, oftentimes. But just kind of chasing the number for the sake of the number. Well, now the person's working more. Now they have more stress. Now they have less freedoms because they have more job tasks and all these things. And so it starts to it can't really capture what that big goal is.
Yep. Maybe you'll find this interesting. I think I remember what we talked about last time. So when I started this journey, trying to think about this stuff, especially about one of the places I started was my relationship with Twitter.
Yeah.
Which again, I originally connected to some cool people, and then I went like viral like twice, and then it was over. I was like too focused for a while. I originally thought this was a story about addictive apps and app design. And there's this really lovely book that is what everyone should read from Natasha Dow called Addiction by Design. Yeah. And it's about how the Vegas gambling industry optimized video poker to addict us to our serotonin spikes. And then that got exported to like Facebook and Twitter and World of Warcraft. And there's this like very specific user interface design that hacks your brain. Yeah. That's what I thought it was about. It was addiction via user interface design. And that's a 20-year-old story. Mm-hmm. And the more research I did, the more I thought, that's the wrong story. That's like 1% of the story. Mm-hmm. Because so much of what's going on involves no carefully gamified user interface apps. A lot of what's going on is educational institutions being warped by the U.S. News and World Report university ranking.
That's a great example.
There's no app there, right? There's just a ranking published in some magazine. And similarly, I think what's actually going on, and I think salary is such a clear vision of this, is that what we're orienting towards is the kinds of things that require no context to count, and that is an orientation towards quantification that is part of this bureaucratic landscape, and that the story is actually about 1,000 years old. It's about 1,000 years of a slow and steady progress away from sensitive, high context judgments towards highly accessible, simplified targets. Yeah. And I just want to say, I'm not saying that metrics are always bad, because the thing that makes them good is exactly this thing. The idea that Porter has, this engineered portability, it's not that metrics are bad. It's that they have a very powerful function for which there is a very powerful design price. Yeah. The function is portability. The cost is low sensitivity.
Yeah. We start to measure it, and then we get obsessed with that, making that measurement go a certain way, but we lose sight of the reason we're doing the thing in the first place. Yep. One example I love that you use, and I think we talked about this last time we met, is wine. And Robert B. Parker, walk us through the wine thing.
So what happened was, wines go really well with food. This is part of the magic of wine, right? If you have wine with food, it reacts, the wine changes, the taste of the food changes, there's often some interaction. And some folks, Robert Parker most famously, wanted to make a more objective wine scoring system. And so they needed to be able to test wines against each other and rank them against each other and give them some kind of score. But the problem is, if you have wine with food, that's too variable, right? Like if I have one wine with chicken and I have another wine with sushi and I have another wine just with some chips, like maybe those things are interfering with each other. Yeah. So to render objective judgments, they created a wine scoring environment, a judging environment in which they removed food, which was a highly variable, highly context-specific factor. And they judged wines against each other without food. But this points us in the direction of a different kind of wine. So this is what gives us what are now called fruit bombs, right? So a lot of modern wines have big flavors, explode on the palate, are really loud, but they don't interact well with food. They don't do anything interesting. They don't do anything dynamic. They don't like have this live, vibrating, resonant, changing, weird thing that was what so many people loved about wine in the first place. So the story of wine culture is that the scoring system in the quest for objectivity cut out highly variable, context-specific interactions to create something that looked like objective judgment. And they did create a more objective judgment of a quality that cut out a lot of what we originally cared about in the first place, right? So a lot of the new wines are bad with food.
Yeah. They have people taste all these wines without food, and then people give them a number. And the magazine was Wine Advocate, is that correct?
Yeah.
So then Wine Advocate, publishes, this wine got a 91, this one got a 95, but it gets that score without the important factor of food. And what I thought is most interesting about this is what happens next, is winemakers go, oh, well, these bottles that are getting a 95 plus, like they're selling at whatever, 3, 4, 5 times the rate. Like the way you make money in the wine industry now becomes you got to get a bottle that scores a 95. And that might be different of how you made wine before that made it interesting. And so this like shifts the entire industry to being like, we need to get a 95 bottle. And that just fundamentally changes the industry forever and how wines taste. And to your point, removes all that important context of like you drink it with food.
We're looking at it in these are cases where the context of actual use is different from the context of judgment. And if you're hyper optimizing, okay, let me give you, okay, I thought of another, I don't think I told you about this one because I thought about this. I figured this out after we talked.
Okay.
Maybe. Here's another example. I started noticing when I started buying a lot of clothes online that were well reviewed, that a lot of the clothes I would get would show up and were super soft and comfortable and would fall apart in 2 months.
I've been there.
The reason is because I think, here's my guess, that people review clothes after they put them on immediately. 99% of online clothing reviews are, I got it, I take it out of the package, I put it on, oh, it feels so soft, it's so good, 5-star review.
Yeah.
Almost nobody comes back after 2 years to review a piece of clothing. And so online marketers have figured out that what does well is 5-star reviews. And the way you optimize for that is you make clothes super soft. And the way you do that is actually you like acid wash the hell out of them at the factory.
Right.
And so they come with the softness of the most delicious piece of clothing you've had for 4 years, and then they fall apart in a small amount of time. It's actually super weirdly similar to the thing I was noticing about Twitter, where, among other things, social media captures likes at the moment of seeing. No one thinks about a tweet for 2 months and then comes back to it and
finds it,
hits like, right?
Finds the person's profile, goes like 50 tweets down and goes, I need to like that right now, 2 months later.
Right. Yeah, the context of capture is immediate. And so that's another way in which the scoring deviates from what we actually find important. I mean, I guess the general lesson through a lot of this is that it's not that quantifications are bad, but it is that they will often miss in systematic ways what we actually care about because of the specific constraints on how we capture the information and what kinds of information we can aim at capturing at scale.
Yeah. So to pull back, your book is called The Score, and score is often a number. Why do quantifications capture us in the first place? What is it about them?
I think, so this was a huge question for me. It's just like, look, it's so weird. It's just this, you put something in a number and suddenly we start caring about it. One answer is that, so the way that a lot of philosophers of technology put it is that when you have a technology, you should think about what it affords, its affordances. This means what it makes easy and what it makes difficult, right? Here's one of the I don't know if this will be meaningful, but a factory. What does a factory afford? Factories afford making lots of things cheaply. What do they not afford? Making things that are custom tailored to a particular interest, right?
Yeah.
But another thing I wanted to say is that quantifications afford comparison, right? So if I say, I'm happy in my job, it's really interesting, it's really stressful, and then you say, I'm happy in my job, it's really chill, and I can be really relaxed. How do we compare those two? That's really difficult. If, on the other hand, I say, I make $100,000 a year, and you say, I make $70,000 a year, there's an instant and immediate comparison. We don't even have to work for it, right? So one thing is it makes comparison seamless. And insofar as we like to compare each other, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But I think the deep story is Porter's story. That what quantifications do is they enable us to be completely comprehensible to each other. Instead of having to justify myself in some weird way, I can justify myself in a way that everybody understands instantly.
And can generally agrees upon.
Yeah, and can generally agree upon. I mean, here's one way to notice it. It's not just a number. I'll tell you why it's not just a number.
Yeah.
I can create a private journal and write how many experiences of total transcendence I had in my outdoor exercise. And I can tick that number up but it's not going to be meaningful to anyone else, right? On the other hand, if I'm like, what's my mileage or what's my weight loss or what's my calories burned, these are things that are meaningful to other people because they're aimed at targets that are cross-contextual. So the thing I think that's really doing the work here is not merely that there's a number, but that number is based on an infrastructure of counting things that we all recognize. So I think it's more about this kind of constructed, portable intercomprehensibility that ties us to the kinds of things that everyone can recognize rather than just a pure. Does that track for you?
That does. I think there's also, we talked about how a measurement can give us a sense of certainty. And like life is really complex, chaotic. How do you know you did the right thing, the wrong thing? But if you can see the number go from 2 to 4, you go, well, that was an increase. Right. Oh, okay. I feel okay. Right. I think your friend's, your climber friend, step count is a great example. With rock climbing as a workout, how do you track that? It's hard, right? There's so many different variables. You're doing all these different movements. How do you really know if you got that much stronger immediately? Like you could track that, over time. Well, I was able to do this a month later. But with steps, it's just, did you hit 10,000 or not? Oh, you didn't hit it? You failed today. You hit it? Congratulations. You're okay, I'm good. I'm healthy today.
Yeah, I think a lot of these things are, this is the dumbest term. I want to call them like binarization devices or clarity devices. Yeah. And you can even see these in games too. So here's the dumbest, maybe you'll find this interesting. This is my favorite dumb thought from writing this book that I don't think anyone else cares about.
Awesome.
So if you have a bunch of people who are very athletic and you have them interact in some way and you're like, okay, pick the best athlete. Even though we're narrowing down just athleticism, that is such a complex judgment. You're talking about skill, you're talking about grace, you're talking about, and even if you do a particular skill, like who's better at like fast maneuvering, like even then, like it's really, like we might all look at a bunch of people like moving around each other, trying to, and we can't make a clear judgment of who won. Yeah. And then we put in a basketball net and we say, okay, get the ball through the hoop. That just instantly clarifies things, right? That's a legibility device. It's a binarization device. Suddenly all of this stuff is aimed at a crux that everyone can read, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I think we find sports so attractive is that there are these artificial environments where we can set these binarization devices, right? And then everyone can look up and suddenly it's clear. We don't have to dispute anymore about who was the greatest. We can just look and count.
Yeah.
But in sports, we're not transforming anything real. When on Twitter, we're transforming communication or politics or healthy society into this binarization that doesn't capture everything.
Yeah, this gets into your idea of games and what the point of a game is. And it's like you've kind of had these collision of these two ideas. So walk us through what a game is and then kind of get into that idea of games that are sort of siloed in these sort of artificial things versus when we take the same idea of a game and we place it on these societal big questions in our lives.
Yeah. So I started writing this book. So I had a long journey down one of the weirdest paths in philosophy. I dedicated myself to the philosophy of games for 5 years, which everyone thinks is weird and dumb because you don't get into highly ranked philosophy journals published.
This was like a hidden thing you were doing, right? This was like, I don't tell anyone about this. I just not talking about it.
It was the thing I thought was the most interesting, but people didn't think it was real. Anyway, and then I wrote this book about how games and scoring systems are these beautiful devices for crystallizing action. And then I started worrying about metrics. And I wrote this book about how scoring systems in metrics drain the life out of everything. And then I realized my two major views completely contradicted each other. And that if my games view was right, then gamification should be awesome. And if my metrics view was right, then games should be terrible. And I couldn't figure out why scoring systems hit so different, why they were so great in games and so horrible in our institutions. And so this is the thing I was trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Games for me are just a super interesting thing. Because what we do in a game is we take on alternate desires. This is, I think, the most, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the heart of a game was. And, there are two things that I think really helped explain it to me.
Okay.
One was Rainer Knizia, my favorite board game designer. He has a game design lecture where he says the most important tool in my game design toolbox is the scoring system, because it sets the player's desires in the game. It tells them what to want.
Yeah.
It tells them whether they're trying to make baskets or collect sheep or get to the top of mountains. It tells them whether they're acting on their own or with a team together, or half of you are on one team against half. Like, it sets your desires.
Right.
The other major account is from the philosopher Bernard Suits, who in the book The Grasshopper defines a game in the following way. He says to play a game is to voluntarily take on unnecessary obstacles to create the process of struggling to overcome them.
You have to create a pain in the ass, an artificial pain in the ass. And that's what makes it interesting. It's like the marathon. Yeah. At the end of the day, you cross this finish line. But if you were to just skip out the 26 miles of running altogether and you just took a cab to the finish line, it's like, well, that's stupid. That wouldn't be fulfilling. It's the act of the hell of running the 26 miles and then crossing the finish line. That's what makes it a marathon. Yeah.
So the way that Suits puts it, I think the sexiest way he puts it, sorry, I think philosophy arguments are sexy. So the sexiest way he puts it is that in games, the goals are partially constituted by the obstacles. So if you're just trying to do something in non-game life, practically, you just do it the most efficient way you can. It doesn't matter how you do it, right? If I just want to be at this spot, right, because it has some stuff I want, just get there the fastest way you can. But crossing the finish line of a marathon is a goal, but that goal is constituted by obedience to constraints. So if I took a cab, it doesn't count as crossing the finish line. Yeah. If I used a stepladder on the basketball court, it doesn't count as making a basket. What making a basket is getting ball through the net while following all these constraints and rules. Mm-hmm. And what this teaches us, I think, is that the struggle has to be essential to the point. Mm-hmm. That the difference for Suits between ordinary life, practical life, and games is that in ordinary life, we often just want stuff and we'll try to get it as efficiently as possible. And games are inefficiencies on purpose.
Yeah.
We force ourselves into inefficiencies. Why would we do that? Only if much or all of the value came from the process of struggling rather than the outcome.
So talk to us about how in the game world, like you're playing Monopoly, the point is it's a pain, right? It's this little fake thing you do with your friends. You rob them. Let's say you screw them over on a move. They don't actually care. They're like, that's the point of it. They don't hate you for doing that. But when we apply this sort of same structures to daily life, how can that backfire?
Yeah. So with games, I think an important thing to understand about games is that what we're doing is not what we're doing, or the point is not the point. So one way to put it, I think, is that in games, the goal and the purpose come apart. The goal is what you're trying to pursue in the game, and the purpose is the larger reason you're doing it. So the goal of charades is to win by communicating. The purpose is to have fun. And you can tell that that's actually the purpose, because if you lose and had a great time, you succeeded.
Yeah.
Right? Similarly, for me, rock climbing, the point of rock climbing is to relax myself and enter a meditative state and kind of clear my brain. And what's important is to do that, I have to go to the climbing gym or go to the crag and just focus intensely on getting to the top. But even if I completely fail at getting to the top, when I leave, my mind will be clear, my body will feel good.
You're still good to go.
You're still good to go. Right. So I call this striving play. So striving play is something where you're aiming at a goal, but your real point is something in the process.
Yeah.
And one of the things we can do in games is that we can because games are so detached from the rest of the world, we can keep pushing around what the rules are. We can keep pushing around the scoring system to give us the action we want. So many games are so different from each other. And you can even see this in one. So in climbing, there are lots of things you can do in climbing. One way to climb is to climb as difficult as much, the most difficult routes you can. Another thing you can do is you can try to flirt with risk. Another thing you can do is you can climb easy routes in beautiful nature and try to climb as many gorgeous areas. There are so many different goals, and you can push around and choose the goal that's the most satisfying to you. Because games are not locked into each other.
Yeah.
The way that the anthropologist Johan Huizinga, who's a super famous game scholar, put it, is that games occur in a magic circle. The meanings in games are isolated from the rest of life. Mm-hmm. Which this means is that, one way he put it is that when we're playing against each other, we cancel out our different relationships. My wife and I are mostly in our daily life supportive, right, loving, and then we play a game and we just try to kill each other.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It's on.
Yeah. Right? That's unrelated. And the fact that I won or she won is also unrelated to our larger life. That's what makes it okay for me to go all out against her in a board game, because those points are detached.
Right.
So games have this isolation, which lets them be radically different. Like if I want to change my game or play a different game, if we want to play, I think sometimes my kids and I, we play Super Mario Smash, and sometimes we play in a normal way, and sometimes we play for the most spectacular death possible. Who cares about who wins, right? And you can just do that. Metrics are not like that, because metrics are attached to real world resources and attached to each other. The whole point of metrics is that they're interconnected, right? The whole point is that everyone counts in them in the same way, so you cannot alter them in a way that makes it better for you. The dumbest way to put it is that you can house rule poker, but you can't house rule GPA. You can't house rule like Twitter likes, because the thing that gave them the value in the first place was that we were all counting in the same way.
Yeah. And people can approach the same game differently. So you have the idea of the striving play versus achievement play. How would that play out in something like how someone approaches something like a marathon?
Achievement play is when you play because you value winning, and striving play is when you play because you value the struggle. And what's interesting is, to get that struggle, you actually have to try to win, but winning doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think one of the interesting things is that we can slide the reasons we play all around, because the point isn't the point, because the goal isn't the point, right? So, I can shift my reasons for playing fluidly during the game, right? Like sometimes I can be playing to win and then realize that this is not enjoyable, and then I can start goofing off. Sometimes I can be, one thing I'll often do is I'll be goofing off with my kid on a video game, and then suddenly realize that my kids are now getting old enough that they can beat me. I'm like, oh wait, this is an interesting challenge. I can go all out now. Yeah. And suddenly we can just try super hard, or we can go in between. Sometimes some games ask you to be super focused and some games don't. And you can shift between them, because it doesn't matter, right? Like if I try something else, if I change my attitude to play Super Mario Smash goofily, and I lose to my kid, nothing happens.
Right, good. You won it. If it felt goofy, you won.
Yeah. So it's one way to put it is that in games, we have a lot of control, both over the goal that we pursue in the game and the purpose that we have for playing it. We can maneuver both around.
Right.
But with metrics, it doesn't have to be this way. You could try to control the metric that you cared about, and you could try to change your purpose. But what they invite us to do is just to take it as given, to give up control, just to be like, well, here's the nearest metric, here's the nearest key performance indicator. Oh, I'm on YouTube. I guess I have to care about subscribers. Right. And you just take the most pervasive metric and you just take it as the goal and the purpose, and you don't maneuver it. So they don't force this. You could try to have a more playful attitude and a more game-like attitude towards these large external metrics. And that's one of the things I hope people try to do.
Yeah.
But what they afford, right, what these technologies encourage us to do is to not figure out what we want on our own and just defer to the external because it's so pervasive and steady and available.
Yeah. I think with the marathon, the striving versus achieving, it's striving would be, okay, I want to improve my fitness. I want to have this interesting experience. I want to see what my body can do. Whether you get first place or last place, you're going to get that from a marathon. Whereas achievement would be, I must hit X time and run at Y pace all 26 miles.
Right.
And there can be a clear failure to that. And so it's just this different frame of mind. And I think that sometimes the achievement can maybe make people a little more nuts in cases. I mean, you could get this big internal reward because, I finished in under 3 hours. But it definitely changes the nature of that marathon.
I think it's actually a little more complicated than that because, so achievement players, what they care about is winning. Striving players, what they care about is an experience of struggle. But for some striving players, the experience of struggle they want, they only get when they're being hyper-competitive. So both striving players and achievement players can be super competitive, right? Like some people, the joy and the pleasure they get comes from really trying hard to win. I think the big difference is the kind of reflective control they have over the game they're playing. So if you're an achievement player and you're just trying to win, then the value of the game for you is winning. You're just going to try to win. If you're a striving player and you value something else, like I value a thrill, right? That means that I can be super competitive in a game. And if I step back and I'm like, was that thrilling? No. Then I can change games. I can go to a different game. So here's something simple. I play a lot of games to experience meditation.
Yeah.
This is why, and I try some games. I get it for a bit. So I hiked for a while for meditation. I realized I would get moments of it, and then I tried hiking more intensely. Like I'm gonna do more mileage. I actually got less meditation, and then I tried fly fishing. And it turns out that fly fishing is for me like a shortcut to pure Zen bliss meditation.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is if I fly fish kind of diffidently and like not really try that hard, I don't get that meditation effect. If I really try hard to catch a big fish, then I have to be super focused on the river.
Yeah.
And when I'm super focused visually on the river and on noticing the bugs, because you have to do that to catch the smart fish in fly fishing, then I get the pure hit of just this pure meditative trance state. And so, does that make sense? So
that does make sense.
The thing that striving play gives you is not an uncompetitive attitude. It's that you can choose what game and the degree of competitiveness and intensity you have in the game in order to hit this larger thing, which is what you actually care about.
Yeah.
For me, actually, it's super interesting. When I am too intense about rock climbing, I lose the joys I have in it. But when I'm super intense about fly fishing, that's when I get the gateway to this mental magic state that is just pure mental flow joined with the river, something magic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too, because a lot of these games can have this element of quantification. And if you only focus on that, that could lead you astray in a lot of ways. I think you had the example of rock climbing, how you just told us how, if you approach it a little more chill, you get more from that. But for a while, you were really focused on, I need to hit the next numbered route because boulders are scaled, climbs are scaled. And so I think it's building that awareness, though, of in what way do I approach this game to get this goal I'm after, whatever it might be. It's like, it's kind of messy and it's hard to do. It takes a little more work. But once you find that, it becomes magic. Whereas if you always just kind of offload to, here's the marker of my success based on this scaling system, that could maybe lead someone astray.
Yeah, it's super complicated and messy. One of the interesting things about rock climbing for me was the difficulty scale. Just being super focused on the difficulty scale was amazing for me for about 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think when I was not very physically apt, if I just kind of meandered around and didn't care much about difficulty, I didn't have to focus on my body. And the goal of climbing harder climbs, because it made me focus on my body and pay more attention to my body, actually unlocked a lot of like pleasure and movement and joy. And so that scoring system was actually super useful for a good amount of time. And then at some point I just hit like my physical peak. Like I'm not that athletic and now I'm a parent. I just don't have that much time. And then once I like hit it to blow, the difficulty scale wasn't working for me anymore. And I got pretty unhappy. And then I had to change. So now I actually pursue my own weird private vision of like doing climbs as elegantly as I can, which is not very portable. But also, I think the thing I have to admit is I couldn't have gotten there without the scoring, engaging in the scoring system as given for a good amount of time. So I think like what this teaches me is not that like scoring systems are bad, metrics are bad, but that they are sometimes useful things that we can manage carefully and can be incredibly powerful when we manage them carefully. And then, I mean, I think there are so many people for whom using the Fitbit is a great motivator and gets them exercise in the beginning. And then you get people who are like, well, I can't rock climb, even though I love it.
I think that's, as you were saying that, I was thinking about how people approach their fitness trackers. I think it's for a person who really doesn't have a lot of awareness around their behaviors. Throwing that thing on your wrist for a few days and you go, oh, I only walked 3,000 steps. I had no idea. And so that can incentivize people to start moving, and that does a lot of good things. What I think happens, especially as people sort of get along the path in, building health and fitness, all of a sudden that becomes the clear marker of success of whether or not I was fit today, and alters their behavior in such a way that could maybe even go against these bigger goals of building fitness. Your friend, the rock climber example is, you could argue, well, if you got enough steps and then you did this sort of strength thing and this movement thing, like that's holistically a better approach for your health than just getting the 10,000 steps without all those other things thrown in.
Yep.
I think you see this in sleep scores as well. People get so fixated on that sleep score. And what cracks me up is when the number, say, goes down, and you almost see people start to panic over the number going down. Oh my God, I had a meeting today. This meeting's going to be a disaster because my sleep score was a 60 instead of an 80. Whereas if you didn't have that sleep score on, you might have woken up and just felt fine. Like, all right, I got this meeting. I'm psyched for this meeting.
Wait, I have a really devastating factoid.
Okay.
Wait, I have 2 devastating factoids for you that didn't make it into the book.
We love devastating factoids. Send them.
I love the comment about how it's super useful if you have no sensibility. Like a lot of these scores are very, very, very rough proxies.
Totally.
And if you have no sensibility in the area, I also had the same thing with nutrition, actually. When I started nutrition tracking with no awareness, it was actually awesome.
Yes.
I had no idea. I had no idea how many carbs were in things. And it took me a while to realize I needed that information to get through my thick skull, that a massively carb and cheese heavy thing made me sleepy and then tired the whole next day.
Totally.
Like I just didn't have enough sensitivity to my body to do that. And then at some point, once I learned that sensitivity, I could depart from the score and pursue like a more like delicate sense of what things were doing well in my body that came apart from those simple mechanisms.
That was my experience entirely. The first time I ever measured my food, and I took what I thought was a serving of peanut butter and learned that it was about 4. So what I thought was about 200 calories was more like 800. It was like, oh, well, that's a useful piece of information moving forward.
What's interesting is that these things can help tune us in. But the worry is that in the long term, okay. When I was researching this stuff, the most brutal example I found, which is not in the book because my editor thought it was too gross, is pickup artist culture.
Interesting.
So pickup artists, for those of you who don't know, are people who compete for sexual success. And it's literally called scoring, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And there are a bunch of sociologists and anthropologists that have studied them. And I read a bunch of these studies. And what I found blew my mind, because it turns out, so pickup artists tend to compete for things. I think you know what they compete for.
Yeah.
Phone numbers, number of sexual acts in an evening, speed for meeting someone to a sexual act with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number of average number of new hookups per night out in a month, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what they don't compete for. This should be obvious, but I think we forget it. They don't compete for quality of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even compete for pleasure. One of there's a sociologist who notes that a mantra throughout the pickup artist culture is you have to give up on happiness or enjoying them. That'll just get in the way of making more numbers. I know, I see you cringe, right?
Unbelievable.
But you can see why. Here's why. Pleasure isn't accountable. If I say I had more pleasure and you say you had more pleasure, there's no way for us to compare, right? But we can compare who got to the sexual act faster.
Right.
Right? Because that's a public measurable.
Public in this case being you and I are on the pickup artist Reddit thread. If you say, hey, 30 hookups in 30 days, and I go, oh, well, I just had 28. You clearly are the better pickup artist if we're only measuring it by that. Deal done.
I mean, I thought when I started reading about pickup artists that it would turn out that pickup artists were evil and manipulative, but at least were enjoying themselves. But it's so much worse than that, right?
Yeah.
It's that so many seem to have burned out any sense of pleasure or joy or any of the reasons you might want in a relationship and created this hollowed out shell of just what's publicly accountable. And I kind of think that we have all become some kind of pickup artist in some era of our life.
What's the most common accounts you've heard from people who are familiar with your work? Like, what are the 5 things you hear people say that you're like, oh, you're the pickup artist of this domain?
It's funny because, I mean, everyone, the ones you're talking about, social media and nutrition are the most common ones I hear. Mm-hmm. But what I often hear are really technical and arcane stories about someone who went. The problem is that a lot of the metrics are very specific. So what I hear often is, oh, I went into education policy because I cared about people. And then I realized for the last 10 years, I've been chasing this outcome that just is become completely disconnected from the thing we care about.
Yeah.
And I hear this. Oh, it's funny. Every time I talk to somebody and I tell them about this, they're like, oh my God, we have the worst one in our profession. What doctors tell me about is, the big measure for them is, basically number of patients seen.
Yeah.
And moving people through quickly. And I think you can quickly see that that's very easy to measure and runs against all kinds of human interaction and kind of care. I know so many doctors who've said like the burden of the measure of the speed measure has just like obliterated everything they wanted out of their medical career, which is to actually connect to human beings.
And make them better. I'll give you an example from my life. When I was working at Men's Health Magazine, I was helping run the website, and we would do 5 stories a day. They were all pretty deeply reported. We talked to multiple sources across the board, blah, blah, blah. We had a new editor-in-chief come in who goes, the way that you get more page views is you have to publish more stories. So 5, that's not going to cut it. You need 30. Well, what happens? You have to stop calling sources. You have to just start making shit up that'll work for a story. Oftentimes people would start finding videos online of like a fight and publishing that because we knew it would do well on page counts. But what is the goal of Men's Health Magazine? It's to inform readers about important health information they can use in their life and improve their life. So once we started pushing that to 30, that went out the window. The site was just a mess and was no longer useful. Now, the page counts, yes, they definitely went up. But in the long term, what was interesting is that it really hollowed out that magazine and people stopped coming in the long run. So it was just this like got fixated on the target, lost sight of what the purpose of this website really was for. And then in the long term, you just saw this crash.
This is a lesson from James Scott in Seeing Like a State, one of the inspirations for this book. Have you read that book?
Mm-mm.
You should absolutely read that book. It's about how large-scale states, and he defines states as any kind of large bureaucratic institution. So it means governments and corporations.
Okay.
He thinks that they can only see the parts of the world that are easily countable in a bureaucratic way, everything we've been talking about. Yeah. And so everything else is invisible to them. What's seeable is what's legible to the state. And then he thinks that states have a motive to remake the world to make it more legible to them. And he has all these stories about, so he opens with the story of the German managed agriculture industry starting to manage the German forests to optimize for plant yield. And it turns out that it's much easier to track what's going on and to measure your interventions if you reduce biodiversity. So they took they replanted the forest from like about 100 different trees to 2 different trees. And they also started planting them in even rows instead of letting them grow with a tangle of underbrush. And what happened was they successfully optimized for plant yield for about 60 or 70 years. And then the ecosystem collapsed because so many important long-term things weren't being tracked. And when you optimize for one thing that you can clearly see, you kind of decimate everything else because there's always trade-offs behind everything. And I think the thing you're talking about, it's funny, like it sounds exactly like the German forestry story, right? Yeah. You had a small thing. It was really, once you have a small thing that you can track, it's really easy to optimize for it. And if you're optimizing just for that thing and cutting out all the kind of longer term, more sustainable, but more subtle qualities, then you're going to have a crash.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that this is the world.
Basically. This made me think a lot about, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's this big push to longevity culture. And living longer. What does that make you think about longevity culture?
Exactly the same thing. But we've already, the medical world has already been through this in a part because, my department is full of bioethicists and medical ethicists. Yeah. And this is a huge amount of the push. So in the medical world, it was for a long time, it was assumed that what you're trying to do is up people's longevity and you want to do any intervention possible to increase the longevity. And because quality of life is hard to track, you just do all these interventions. And what you get is, I think, the thing that we're aware of, which is this brutal attitude, especially towards end-of-life care,
right.
That tends to push for longer life no matter what. And now we're seeing the pushback, right? A lot of what we have now about a lot of us have do not resuscitate. A lot of us have a lot of advanced directives because the medical establishment took decades to come off of just being obsessed with longevity at any price towards being able to be open to people making decisions about quality of life versus longevity.
Yeah.
And now it feels like a lot of people are just doing the same. George Carlin, back in the day, he one of his old jokes was, yeah, people say you live longer if you run more, but you spend all those years running. And right. It makes, you want a good life.
Yeah.
Too short, not great. A life where you've made the number of years go up by forcing yourself to do a bunch of things you hate for your entire life.
Right.
One of the things I was thinking about was, in public policy, in health policy, we often have these fights between what makes people live longer or reduce their cardiac arrests and things that make people happy. So I'm just thinking about incredibly rich foods, right? Yeah. Like brie. It's really easy to do a social measure about lower brie rate, eating lower amounts of super fatty foods, decreasing people's heart attack rates. Yeah. And it's really hard to assess how that changes people's happiness levels.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's not important to lower heart attack rates, but there's a complex value trade-off here. But when one end is easy to measure and the other end is not, the end that's easy to measure tends to auto-win fights without consideration.
Right.
And the harder to count stuff just disappears from our deliberation. And that's not good.
Yeah, we just had a guy named Dean Statman come on. He wrote a article for GQ about how his New Year's resolution was to drink more. So he's one of these guys who's kind of hyper optimizer fitness culture guys. He hears all these podcasts where they say the absolute best amount of alcohol is 0. Alcohol is associated with XYZ bad health outcomes. Yeah. So he goes, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. And over the course of about 3 or 4 months, he realizes he's depressed. And he goes, he's less happy. He goes, why is this happening? And he goes, oh, because when I would go out for a drink or two, and he was not a heavy drinker, this is important, he was hanging out with his friends. He was going to different places. He was going to sporting events and he would drink. And he would go to bars and he'd have these wacky conversations with people at the bar that he'd never met. And those things are really hard to measure, right? So it seems very clear, like, oh, if you just want to optimize your health, you stop doing this thing. But then once he does, he goes, oh, there was all these unmeasurables. Like no one on the long health podcasts are going like, well, we can quantify that if you talk to, Sully from Dorchester at the bar for 10 minutes, that will increase your happiness by 6 points. So try and find your version of that. Like that doesn't ever happen. And so I think it's that hyper optimization of the number removed all these unmeasurables that people don't often account for. And you can just apply that to a lot of different areas of life.
I was talking to this doctor on a podcast, and he was really on board with this stuff. He was worried about metrics, and I was like, yeah, happiness and joy is so important. He was like, yeah, and when you feel joy, we have a lot of evidence that it makes your heart pressure go down. You live a little longer. And I was just like, hold on. Like, if we are justifying joy in terms of a medical effect, then we have gotten things the wrong way. Like, that doesn't need further justification in some sort of quantifiable.
Right.
I mean, I think you've been drifting around this thought. We've been drifting around this thought. And I want to put one more story down for you. This is something I learned from the philosopher of food, Megan Dean. She told me about a bunch of medical research about people that had been anorexics for a long time, trying to come off of anorexia. And what people will tell you is, well, what you need to do is eat till you're satisfied. Just eat till you feel full. And it turns out that a lot of people who have been anorexics for so long have lost their sense of being able to tell that they're full. They lose that internal sensibility. And part of the thing seems to be that when you're so externally oriented towards accountable, you lose touch with internal sensation of your own feelings. I was talking to Megan Childs, the journalist. She runs. She does one of the journalists who's on Planet Money. We were talking about this stuff, and I told her the story, and she was like, "Oh my God, I realize that I've been working so hard for so long that I can no longer tell when I'm sick because I've just learned to tune that out, and I just I rely on my coworkers to tell me when I'm sick because I can no longer feel it."
That's wild.
And I think this is related to one of these things where. This is the weird arc, this horseshoe. Like, it's so interesting to me that when I was completely untuned to my body, what I needed was a simple scoring system to give me enough information to be able to tune in and feel pleasure in my body moving, and also be able to tune in and tell that eating 2 pounds of cheesy pasta made me feel weird. I needed the data.
Yeah.
But on the other end, there's a level of data fixation such that it just overwrites any sensations from your body or your happiness. And you no longer seem to be able to steer by whether things make your life happier or make your body feel better. And that's like the tragedy at the other end that, I don't know, it just seems like the worst thing, and a thing I've done to myself like 100 different times.
I feel like anyone listening can probably find an example where this has happened in their life. So where do people go from here if they're listening? Like, how do you identify this? And like, what are the conversations you have to have? I don't know if there's a clear answer, but what are your thoughts there?
I am the weird kind of optimist about, well, a romantic maybe. I think games kind of give us an example. Mm-hmm. I mean, what games are, if you're playing them reflectively, if you're playing them in the striving way, is you try on a scoring system and then you step back and you ask yourself, is this what I really want to be doing? You don't just, for most of us, play a game relentlessly. You step back and ask if it's fulfilling to you. And I think that is at least something we can try to carry over towards other things, but it's harder. I mean, part of the difference, I'm not going to just say it's just a flip you can switch, a switch you can flip, because our basic relationship to games is one of variety, right? There's so many games, you can try them, you can move them, you can modify them. And our basic relationship to metrics is not. Like, the way metrics function, one system tends to become dominant in a social arena. And it's much harder. So the philosopher Maria Lugones says that what playfulness is the ability to hold rule worlds lightly, to step into and out of different worlds with different rules easily, and to be in them, she says, creatively. And I think that kind of relationship of being able to enter, but being distant, reflective, willing to tinker with, that's a useful spirit, but it's so damn hard to do.
Well, I loved in the book, you had this line, the reason you wrote the book, you had a student where you gave a long lecture about all of these topics. You can tell us about the student and why she did this, but she put this question on her phone after your lecture, and it said, is this the game you really want to be playing? So tell us about that.
Yeah, she wrote me after I was giving some of the early material from this book in lectures. And she said that it had pulled her out of 5 years of depression because she realized now she was stuck in games she didn't want to be playing. So she gave me permission to tell this story. She said she was like me, first generation Asian American immigrant, pushed to get good grades. Also, unlike me, a varsity athlete, so pushed to score better. Also anorexic. Also so obsessed with grades and BMI and nutrition and doing well in her sport and just spiraling into misery. And what she said she realized was she was stuck in bad games that she hadn't known were bad games, and she hadn't realized she had a choice over. And so she said she programmed her phone. She just changed the back screen, the background on her phone to always show her the same question, which is this the game you really want to be playing? And I think that encapsulates the thing, this frame switch that I'm trying to think about, which is to treat these things the world is shoving at you. Sometimes you can't escape them entirely. Like a student can't escape what GPA means to the rest of the world. Right. But there's still a huge amount of difference between being like, well, these grades are something the rest of the world cares about, but I have my own reasons for education and I'm going to pursue it in my way, versus all I'm just going to do is optimize for grades. All I'm just going to do is optimize for, right?
Yeah.
BMI, likes, whatever.
And what I think is so interesting too is outwardly, if the average person asks that student about their life before your lecture, they would go, wow, this person's winning. 4.0, varsity athlete, scored 25 points last game. Yep. They're thin, they're fit, great. And so that almost reinforces getting stuck in that loop because you have this outside reinforcement. But internally in that process to get it, misery happened. And so framing back, publicly, maybe if she starts behaving differently, now she's got a 3.9, people go, oh, that's not a 4.0.
Yep.
But internally, she's much better off.
Yeah. And I think, and the whole point is, this is what Porter taught me, the portability theory of quantification, right? That it's no accident that these numbers are what everyone will instantly recognize as success, because that's what they're made to be.
Yeah.
They're made to be instantly accessible, instantly transportable, instantly comprehensible success measures. I mean, this is definitely something I found out after the last time I talked to you.
Yeah.
I was telling some of this stuff to a political philosopher. He was like, oh yeah, Hobbes thought a lot about this. And then he told me something that blew my mind. So Thomas Hobbes, political philosopher, a lot of people know him as the person that said that morality comes down to political power and who has more political power. And he ended up giving us an account of political power that I didn't know about. He says that the true ultimate political power is not military might or strength or force of arms, but the power over language, the power to define what success and failure mean for people, and the power to define what good and bad mean for people. And scoring systems are just definitions of success.
Yeah.
And if you accept one from somewhere else, you're letting them rule you and letting them tell you the terms in which you think of your own success and flourishing.
Amazing and correct. Going to start landing the plane. I got 2 final questions.
Okay.
You have a good theory on why people fall into conspiracy theories. Tell us.
Yeah, it's actually super related.
Yeah.
So clarity, I think, is the feeling of getting things, the feeling that everything makes sense. The way that some philosophers of science and education put it is that when you understand something, you have a good model for it. You see how everything connects together. And one of the things I think is that you often get these fake models that oversimplify things and make everything easy to connect. That's what a conspiracy theory is, right? Suddenly, instead of the complexity of the world, you just have one thing that will explain everything really powerfully. But I also think metrics do something similar. Instead of having to justify yourself with a million different values, you suddenly have this one thing that ties, like, everything I'm doing is because it makes my salary go up, or everything I'm doing is because it makes my sleep score go up. You have this one all-consuming measure that can just reach out into everything and make explanation really simple.
Yeah. And that was I loved it so much because there's almost a paradox when you hear people talk about conspiracy theories. You know, we have the image of the person who's on the wall of their house. They have like 50 pictures and one thing leads to another and another and another. And it looks very complicated. But in the end, there is a very specific answer. It's a government conspiracy. It can't just be like, oh, well, maybe someone was incompetent down the line. Maybe this is just really complicated. Like, we don't really know. Who knows? Yeah. You get that clear answer. And it's like, that's why things are not good.
I mean, it's a lot of what's behind a lot of what I've been thinking about is that the world is unbelievably complicated and human brains are tiny and small. And it feels good when we can simplify the world. And in games, that's what games are. They're simplifications of value. You just get to focus on this one thing, but it's temporary. Yeah. With games, we know it's temporary. With other stuff, when you reduce everything to a single conspiracy theory or an attempt to maneuver your entire life around your longevity, it's an illusion.
Or grades, or salary, or insert so many things. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. You are you are like a foremost expert in board games. And you actually got me, after we talked, I started getting into board games. And I thank you for that. They're so much fun. Those were missing from my life, 100%. 3 board games that you would recommend to everyone. Start with one that's accessible and then get into whatever you want from there.
Okay. The most accessible, simple game that you can be playing in like 3 minutes, that's amazing, is The Mind. This is like modern game design. So The Mind is a cooperative game where you're trying to do the simplest task. The game randomizes number cards to people, and you have to play them out in order. You have to cooperate to play them out in order. Except you can't talk or signal or communicate in any way.
Awesome.
So the game forces you to develop a shared vibe about the appropriate amount of time to wait. It teaches you to silently learn to like develop a sense of timing together. One of my students said it felt a lot like learning to be in a jazz band together, except you could get there in like 30 minutes with one group because the task was so simple. That is awesome. My favorite simple game. My favorite ultra complicated board game right now is Cole Worley's Root, which is a simulation of a complex economic social conflict translated into cute little fairy tale animals. But one of you is like an industrialist, and one of you is like communist revolutionaries, and one of you is like an arms dealer, and you're viewing the world in totally different ways. Super interesting.
Awesome.
So there's this world of indie tabletop role playing, and maybe my favorite right now from that space is called The Quiet Year by Avery Archer. And it's a storytelling game in which you play the spiritual, godlike forces that surround a village barely surviving after the apocalypse. And you have to respond to various prompts and tell a story about the villagers. And every turn, you have to draw the event that just happened onto a shared map. So you slowly build this beautiful shared map as you like tell the trials and tribulations, and you have people die and help each other and survive. And it's just like this piece of collective narrative magic that you can just do.
It's like a Russian novel translated into board games.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That you live improvise.
I love it. Well, Thi, thanks so much for coming on the show. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much, man.
Thanks as always for checking out the show, and many thanks to Thi for coming on the episode. His book is called The Score: How to Stop Playing Somebody Else's Game. If you want to live better and think better, I highly recommend you get that book. It is probably #1 on the best books I've read this year. As always, we are going to be in your feeds twice a week, so keep an eye out for more. Send us questions for our Ask Michael Anything section to media@twopct.com or drop them in the comments. Send us a voice memo or a video. We love that. Try and answer as many questions as possible. And please do not forget to subscribe, because if that number gets higher, clearly, as we just learned in today's episode, my life will get so much better. Have fun, don't die, and maybe don't always abide by the numbers.